Hey, good afternoon for those on the East Coast. Good morning if you're dialing in or connected to us from the West Coast. It's 2:03 Eastern time. Let's go ahead and get started. Thanks so much for joining me today to talk about a DLP 15. My name is Matt Reid. I lead the risk management business here at ITS. I've been with the company for just over 4 years. I have just over 20 years experience in IT security. I started as an analyst back in the 90s, went into professional services and bring all that back to the channel and back to the partner world. And I've been with ITS for the last 4 years. Thanks for joining today, everyone. So just a little bit about us. We are a typical systems integrator, partnered with a few companies very intentionally in order to be deep product experts and to be real specialists and have that specialization. So we're partnered with Symantec for risk management, ServiceNow for IT service management, asset management, as well as security operations. And we're partnered with Microsoft on the systems management side of the house. We're a national partner and platinum with Symantec. We hold all of the technical distinctions that they offer to their partners and to their technically driven, integrators like us. We deliver services on behalf of about 12 or 13 other partners in the community, including Symantec. And we have a very diverse customer and service base, mostly focused in the Fortune 500 space. Some Fortune 2000 in there, probably a couple of Fortune 200s, but largely focused in that F500 segment. And we are headquartered in Grand Rapids, Michigan, although we have resources, consultants, sellers, etc., all over the country. So just a little bit about what we're about, what we believe in, what we subscribe to. We call these our IT doctrines. We find that productive organizations, they can't do everything best practice. We really need to prioritize the outcomes that are needed most. Doing everything best practice usually results in teams. They've got the mission ready teams in place for each key function. This is a critical part of solution adoption, is having the people with the right training and the right expertise to operate them. So, those key functions, they've got the right wisdom, clearly defined roles and responsibilities. Connecting the silos. We try to break down those silos, look for ways to connect the teams and tools across the various functions. We find that IT is very siloed. Often, that we do find collaborative organizations, but in large, we find that people are relatively siloed. So we want to spend less time jumping from tool to tool, where connections between the tools can be made across those silos or across those different groups and departments. And what's nice about that is when we accomplish some headway or some maturity in one particular function, it often helps or increases the maturity of other functions. When we connect those silos. Process before tools. So this is essentially recognizing that the key processes, which is part of the reason we have all these different protection and detection tools in the case of risk management. We make sure that these processes are documented, implemented, and ideally, where possible, automated. And so we maximize the tool sets to get the most value. And in the case of the security tools or risk management tools, we're getting the best protection possible. So, organizations that are looking to mature across those IT silos and get down to impacting processes and ideally the business, we don't want them wasting time on manual, time-consuming tasks. And in this situation. It makes a strong case for automation as well as process improvement, something that is definitely coming. And so after 15 years of our company working in this area, we feel that we're uniquely positioned to help organizations with this dilemma right here, and that is we've entered into a new era of IT where the biggest challenge is balancing productivity for the users and for the workforce, but also keeping risk low for the organization and keeping the good stuff in, and ideally keeping the bad stuff out. So when I got into IT 20 years ago, we ran and we ruled the kingdom with a fist. And as many of you know, it's no longer the case. IT wants to be liked now. We want good rollouts and good projects, and we don't want a user community coming after us with the pitchforks and the torches. So we feel that we're in a unique position to address this dilemma that many of you probably face. Want to make everyone aware that we've got some great content available on our website, some really great thought leadership here from different lines of business here at ITS. You can download these there, or you could even request printed copies from an account manager, regional manager, or even myself if you happen to want the printed copies. We can get those out to you. So our agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about DLP. We're going to talk a lot about DLP, and not so much a history, but just kind of like a point in time recognition of where we are with DLP adoption. And then we're going to get into talking about some of the new features. There's been a lot of improvements in DLP 15. This has been a very anticipated and awaited release. It's very new. It's only been out a short time. And we're finding more and more information and more documentation, more technical goodness as we move forward. Symantec is releasing more and more information to their internal employees, as well as to their partners and to their customers. And then I'll probably share a little bit about how you might be able to leverage us if you're looking for assistance, if you're looking for help from an integrator along the lines of DLP. We have a lot of success, a lot of good things going on here that we are able to share with organizations, having worked with hundreds of companies. Okay, so DLP adoption, where are we? This was a snapshot that I had taken after talking with a lot of people in the industry and looking at where our customer base is in the DLP journey, the people that own it, who are focused on maturing, who are focused on rolling out to all the various control points and solving the different vectors, to the late majority or even some of the laggers who are now mobilized. This is especially pertinent down market. Okay, so DLP adoption, if you're familiar and you've subscribed to technology adoption in the way of that life cycle, this is where we believe that we are from an adoption of DLP. And what's interesting is although we are at this point in history, I think we're all agree that the game is changing in front of us, right? So while we're solving the control points within the four walls of the enterprise, the game and the methods are evolving and are changing. Notably, the cloud is probably the biggest driver there. But just as far as point in time, here's where we're at with DLP adoption. So depending on where you sit with this, this either makes you feel good or maybe it makes you feel a little bad. Not intending to do that, but just a level set on where we're at with DLP adoption. Okay, and those of you that are familiar with DLP, you know that, especially in the case of Symantec, it follows a proposition called the risk reduction over time. And if you look at the left, this is the incidents per week, and then the axis on the bottom that goes left and right, that's time. So when we install this product, we embark into visibility. We now have eyes and ears. Plausible deniability is kind of thrown out the window. but basically we're going to see a lot of things that are happening, and we're going to cross over into remediation, and that's ideally aimed and focused on resolving broken business processes where we have people that are just trying to do the right things, they're trying to do their jobs, but we're now able to identify that we have a violation of security and company policy, and this gives us the opportunity to start remediating these things and start correcting them. After that, we start to transition from this being a purely IT-led and driven initiative and getting this more connected and more integrated into the business, and that's where notification comes in. And this is notification at a couple levels. This is notifying the users and trying to drive more of a culture of security and establishing better stewards for handling the information for the organization. But we're also continuing to kind of make this not so much an IT problem or IT security problem, and get this in the hands and get some proximity to the business with the different departments and the different managers and the different people who really have that intimacy with the data, with the information that their teams are accessing or handling or potentially sharing, right? And then after all of this, do we get to this opportunity of this notion of potential prevention or protection? So, you know, this time axis over time across the bottom, this can be anywhere between 6 months, depending on the control points, depending on, you know, the appetite to get this stuff optimized, depending on regulatory pressures, depending on executive sponsorship and leadership around the DLP program overall. And this could also be 3 years that it takes to get down this proposition. But I do find that there are a number of companies out there. It would probably vary by industry and by size, but a lot of them are stuck somewhere in this area of visibility and remediation. They've never made it down into really notifying or notifying people to the level that's possible, and then in most cases is appropriate and prudent with the DLP initiative. So a lot of great stuff, like I was saying, that has been put into DLP 15, and this is kind of the granular big list between, you know, the discovery piece, the core platform, cloud enhancements, as well as improvements to the endpoint. But and while this is all in the release notes and this is all available for people to go through in detail, I really wanted to just focus on these 3 things. So I want to spend most of the time talking about information-centric encryption, the OCR, or character recognition, as well as some of the DLP server infrastructure and form factor improvements. So those of you that have been with Symantec DLP know that there's been some restrictions and some limitations in the type of infrastructure that you can leverage for your DLP solution and for the infrastructure to support all the software. And there's been some great advancements recently where I think we're finally at a point where we have form factors that are right for you or right for me, depending on what your strategy is with virtualization, depending on what your requirements are and needing, you know, certain performance and certain horsepower to, you know, adhering to what your standards are. We've got several options available for us now, which is great. So let's go into OCR. And first, we should probably stop and look at comparison between something that is reminiscent of OCR that's been built into legacy versions of Symantec DLP, and that's form recognition. So form recognition, this is really appropriate for, and Symantec developed this, if I'm not mistaken. It could have come from an acquisition, or perhaps it came with the Vontu acquisition to begin with. I have trouble remembering. It's been a long time. But Symantec did develop this technology for their DLP tool, and how it works is it works with typed and handwritten forms. It is language as well as script agnostic. It does handle handwriting, which is interesting. So we can recognize handwriting, and this is really good for like your standard repeatable office forms, maybe tax forms. It could be some standard forms that your organization uses, where sensitive business information could be entered or leveraged, or maybe PII or PHI. It's typically higher performing than OCR, which is good that it's been here in the technology, and it is typically more resilient to issues with quality in those forms. So it even could be like a rotated form, or maybe an image that's been transformed or formed like that, that's got poor quality, or there's been some sort of degradation. It could be scans. So there's more resiliency to accommodate that there. And there's also some independence of the existing DLP matchers. So IDM, EDM, described content matching, vector machine learning, and things like that. And it does require pre-indexing. So we need to index the blank forms, and then we're able to look at the delta, or look at the mods or the changes or the contents within those forms, once the system is aware of them. So on the other side of this, what's coming, even though it's not new, it's now new to DLP 15, and that's OCR. So this has been around a long time. This has been around since I got into IT back in the 90s. I remember this term being used back then, and this works a little bit differently than form recognition. This will chain up to your existing DLP matchers, and that's your DCM, EDM, IDM, and so on. And it works for what this is really useful for is a comparison to the forms. Is this works really well for screenshots as well as digitized documents. So your raster images. I've seen raster images that terminology being used in the documentation this week and last week, and it reminds me of my AutoCAD days. So highly script sensitive too, and this applies to languages, to other scripting that could be included, especially in the way of API driven like development platforms and things like that. So performance, there's performance and accuracy issues here with poor quality. So you're kind of seeing some of the corollary between form recognition and OCR, where form recognition is weak, OCR is often strong. Where OCR is often weak, form recognition has been there for us. So we've got a couple different things here that we can leverage, beyond your typical matchers, but it's gonna chain up to them nonetheless, which is good. It does not handle handwriting. No handwriting, but does not require that pre-indexing that the form recognition would need with blank forms. So we've got a couple different approaches here to take with these types of documents and these types of images. So how does this work, right? It's just in a nutshell. Basically, this stuff extracts text from images, and this could be scan documents, this could be screenshots, could be photographs, and we're leveraging this with a pre-existing DLP policy and ideally response rules. So OCR text is going to be treated the same as any conventionally extracted text. Once it's out of OCR and made available to the DLP platform, it's business as usual. And we can even see in the incident snapshot, I think I've got a screenshot here in the presentation that kind of shows, the OCR origin, and you can trace that back because it does give us some abstraction there, which is helpful. So there's pretty good language support. I think there's over 100 languages that are supported, custom dictionaries for some of these companies or organizations who may have unique terms and verbiage that they want to be able to be looking for, different patterns, different sequences, things like that. And then we have support for all of the server-side detection channels. And this is what's great about this, and we're still learning quite a bit about OCR and how this is going to be handled at a server level. We do have some different deployment models and methods that we can leverage here. So we can leverage the OCR role, if you will, on a given detection server. And then there's some off-host options there. So, you know, as Symantec releases more and more information as it becomes available, there's going to be, like, for example, I know there's some sizing considerations that we have to consider and take into account for these OCR servers. So just think of it as an extension of your detection infrastructure. There will be a discrete piece there for OCR should that functionality you know, be appealing to you, or if you have the needs there. And so this is the incident snapshot. So there's a good screen grab here. It's showing a print screen image down in the lower right there with a related incident from the console. So in this case, we've got a print screen that was done where we have PII riddled throughout the document, and then we have all of these, you know, all these matches found in this one component here. So just an example, you know, the incident snapshot, you're all probably pretty familiar with that. And what's cool about this is taken and matched off of a screenshot using that OCR functionality. So those some of the workflow and kind of how this works, some of the nitty gritty in this, if you're interested. I won't spend a ton of time on this, but there's some pre-processing usually that has some forms of alignment. It could be scaling. It could be converting, you know, something into binary. From there, we go into determining the layout and parsing out of the image, you know, pulling the lines of interest out of the respective sections, and we're kind of pulling this out of the image and pulling this into a format that the DLP matchers can take advantage of. So next we move into like the character recognition, and this is where, you know, the matcher kind of kicks in. We're now able to recognize letters and reliance on that conversion, even if it's language. We can even convert on language, which is pretty impressive. So the post-processing, this is pretty simple from what I read. It sounds like it's all dictionary based, so it just usually involves applying the different dictionaries and kind of doing those last steps at the matcher level. So this is typical processing, but DLP 15, you know, all this is kind of obfuscated in this OCR engine or in this OCR server. So this is kind of, you know, we kind of get the easy button with this instead of having to be part of all this typical processing and troubleshooting and working along this workflow. This is all made really easy. It's just bundled up in the OCR engine and then handed off to the DLP matchers. So very simple. So this is an example of an off-host deployment. And from what I understand, there is some load balancing, there is some fault tolerance, some redundancy that can be established in this. And I'm assuming these are all going to be, you know, based in the cloud. And this is all accomplished with REST APIs, communicating between your detection servers where the matchers live and the OCR servers themselves. So we got a secure connection via REST there. And then if you have a larger environment, perhaps you have a big global environment, perhaps you have different lines of businesses or different companies that are kind of affiliated. You may have multiple enforced deployments. We don't see this a lot, but we do see it from time to time. And if we do have that situation, we do have some flexibility and some granularity there, and that we can leverage some fault tolerance and some redundancy and kind of use a pool of OCR resources between various geographical locations. So for some of our global customers out there who are, anxious to leverage OCR functionality, this is something that can apply to you. We don't have to have redundant OCR servers per regional location. One of the benefits of the cloud is all this should be available to all these locations. We can leverage a pool approach, which is kind of cool. So for this technology being new to Symantec, it's nice that they've thought through a few different scenarios and deployment options in order to suit individual needs. So let's move on to ICT and ICE, so information-centric tagging and encryption, and these things kind of go hand in hand. This is a really, really big one as far as what's really driving people to go and upgrade and continue their investment in Symantec DLP are these two pieces. So, a lot of companies are asking how do we confidently enable the users to classify the sensitive data that they create? How can we ensure that it's protected when shared, right? Explosion of data, explosion of devices, users being all powerful, bring your own everything. I mean, it's making things really, really crazy. And we have accepted for some time that DLP is much better when we apply classification and treat our sensitive information like currency. And with information tagging, instead of relying on a classification tool, which is largely and typically very IT or security driven, we can take, and again, this is about enabling the business and enabling the appropriate people to make these decisions about how the workforce interacts with shares and potentially, discloses, was what we're trying to prevent, the company's information assets. So with this notion of user tagging or information-centric tagging, your user community can get involved in this, which is appropriate and very due, and they can easily classify that data as it's created, and you can leverage the integration of DLP to provide some real benefits to the organization. So first, the DLP protection policies can be automatically applied to this with information-centric encryption. So just think ICT equals ICE. If we tag it, we can do a better job of maintaining privacy through encryption. So your existing policies can be automatically applied. We find information that's got a tag or a watermark on it, we can better facilitate encryption automatically, which is a beautiful thing. So in addition to that, should data be found on your discovery scans, that's where you kind of determine your opportunity to leverage classification. So the best part, again, is we can rely on IT security can rely on the workforce to do the tagging, and that's a huge benefit. You can also use this functionality to add, these data-sensitive tags and watermarks to your detection rules. So these are going to be defined in the information-centric tagging part of the UI, and then applied to the users and files and even emails, from what I understand. And then we're going to configure DLP to basically read those user-driven tags, and this could be in Office documents, this could be in Adobe PDFs, it could be just about anything. And then even in the watermarks and some of the emails, And that is where we get to do something really important, and that is take the response actions based on those rules. And in most cases, it's going to be facilitating encryption. So let's talk about some of the platform and the integration pieces of this. So the principles of this information-centric encryption is, again, DLP is facilitating and driving encryption, and this is something that we've known for a long time. We all talk about, we all, discuss this, is DLP is really a steward and a facilitator for encryption. So, there's a lot of different routes and a number of ways that we can get to this, but this stands to really be a great thing to bring to the organization as far as trying to reduce risk. And again, DLP is going to drive and facilitate this. This is what's going to look in there and say, hey, this needs to be encrypted, and it's going to facilitate that automatically. And take this out of the user's hands, right? So like, I remember a time not so long ago when I actually spoke with someone a few weeks ago who was still doing this, where they were relying on the users and were relying on the workforce in order to manage encryption of sensitive information. So when they were perhaps sending something out in an email, they were appending in the subject line the word confidential or private, and that would trigger the gateway security to encrypt, the attachment to encrypt the email. Well, we know that that's not the ideal way to do it. We need automatic protection here. We need an automatic facilitation of encryption. Relying on the user is one way to do it, but it's not ultimately the best way to do it. People don't know, people forget, people are in a hurry. There's all kinds of problems with that, as we see. So we know there's a better way to do that, and this is the utmost improvement in the way of solving this. So once we've got this encrypted, we identify sensitive information, we facilitate and operate as that steward of encryption. The opportunity to decrypt it travels with the data wherever it goes. So if it's on-prem, if it's in SharePoint, if it moves out to Box, if it moves out to OneDrive, we're going to follow the data where it goes. And that's a big part of the problem that we're trying to solve today, right? Just when we think we've got the job done and we solve this within the four walls and where data resides, it goes and moves. People move it up to, different cloud repositories. They attempt to share it with people. And that's breaking this. That's kind of creating, we've got DLP all in a bucket, and we've got our data protection, in a bucket protecting it, but the bucket has no bottom anymore. So we need the protection to follow the data where it goes. And identity is very closely related to this. This is all about who you are. That is control, and it is control of this and is responsible for this. Is identity ultimately is going to drive the encryption, and once you get through that visibility, you can start implementing the controls. So whether it's cloud, whether it's mobile, it's these are the principles of information-centric encryption. So how does this work? Those of you that are familiar with cloud access security brokers, you can basically move it over into that camp. This is very much CASB centric. It also brings in some pieces of authentication. In this case, we're thinking VIP if we're thinking Symantec, but really it comes down to leveraging DLP to figure out, all right, what are we going to protect? What's the context? And then how do we leverage the identity of the individual or the individuals with multi-factor authentication to be able to access or view or see, decrypt the file, right? And there is a centralized console for this where, call it the ICE console, but it's probably the cloud stock the Elastica UI. You do have a centralized management console for looking at these different things. You could be revoking files, but you have one central place for that that's going to make management as simple as possible. Okay, so classification. I mentioned classification. It's really, really important. And this is a nice visual here that shows whether it's your discovery for data at rest, or whether it's your data in motion controls, or maybe even endpoint or host-based DLP, or a CASB or DLP cloud. We're classifying all these different locations or all these different control points, and then able to bring this in, whether it's the users tagging the information, whether it's DLP doing some sort of content-based classification. We've got two methods and two ways that we can take this idea of tagging and then take our policies and give you better protection, whether it's the data being created in email, whether it's in Office, whether it's on mobile devices. It's all here now, and this idea of classification is now finally a thing. I mean, we do a lot of work with some of the legacy methods of classification. We do work with Data Insight. We will work with Titus in the past, but it's great to finally have the system content-based classification as well as the user-based classification all integrated and all native to the DLP, Symantec DLP platform now. So we're living in good times that way. So as far as bringing this all together, kind of additional workflow, additional visuals as far as how does this work. DLP again is going to be the facilitator here and is going to perform that discovery against the existing data, leveraging whether it's policy or it could even be machine learning. There's going to be a tag applied to that to add the classification, and then we're going to take ideally we're going to get some user input on this, so it isn't going to be all system, it's not going to be all end user input, but it's going to be a combination of those two things to determine, okay, when is this going to get encrypted? Is this going out to the cloud? Where does this go? It doesn't matter anymore because we're going to follow the information. It's not about where's the protection anymore in the way of a control point. Now it's associated with the information, which is, it's kind of like a gas. It's just going to fill the room, right? It's going to fill the room, spill out the window, spill under the door. It's going everywhere. And then, the organization is going to have that visibility. They're going to be able to control that classified information, regardless of where it is. And again, being a better steward and facilitator for encryption. Something else that really stood out to me in the release notes is there's a lot of talk about GDPR. There's going to probably be a lot more talk about it after the beginning of the new year, coming up on that May deadline. So there is functionality in 15 where you can provide essentially a risk assessment for a GDPR requirement if you're a global organization. And there are some proactive tool sets that we've kind of talked about today. The Centric Security, which is the data classification, the encryption service. There's some analytics there that are again coming via this cloud stock and all the cool data science that's wrapped up in there. As most of you know, GDPR, it's mostly about PII. So in this case, we're able to extend the protection to PII in scanned forms, pictures, images. Think about driver's licenses, passports. It could even be checks if anybody's still writing checks. I have a couple of things that I do business with personally where they still prefer checks, like storage services and storage units, things like that. But GDPR breach detection and response, again, this is kind of the analysis side of the cloud stock and the data science. And this is basically giving the organization the opportunity to respond to data breaches via the analytics that are now kind of based on this information centricity. So that's got to be this cool data science stuff found in the CASB tool, found in the cloud stock. And then finally, it's giving organizations a holistic approach to educate and prepare, whether it be, leveraging the agents, leveraging the tagging. If we're talking about authentication being a critical piece of all this, using push notification or push authentication from within, VIP or within the CASB tool. DLP has been telling us for a long time, how to better leverage encryption. It's also been telling us for some time how to better leverage authentication, mainly multi-factor or two-factor. So these things all belong together, and that's Symantec's strategy at large with information protection is DLP, encryption, and authentication. So let's talk about the new form factor support. We're coming around the home plate here. We're getting pretty close to the end. So choose your form factor. So this is great. We've had some real restrictions, limitations, you could almost say, with regard to network monitor, with regard to enforce. And now we've got this idea of, kind of right for me, form factor. So depending on your strategy, depending on how you're doing things and how you procure the different aspects of infrastructure to support all of the different security applications, now we've got a few more options to work from here. So first of all, we're working with a lot of organizations who are transitioning out of the four walls of the enterprise and into, someone else's data center or the cloud, right? So they have, for some of them, for a long time, have been wanting to go to virtual infrastructure and to go to a hosted platform such as Microsoft's Azure, and that's where we do most of our hosted work with that type of service providers. We work with Microsoft, but we're at a great time because Symantec is now supporting virtual appliances for the Network Prevent Web, Network Prevent Email, even the API integration with different developer platforms. We now have virtual appliances for all these various roles. We even have a Network Prevent for Web hardware appliance that is available from Symantec. If that, suits your requirements or meets your needs more than a virtual appliance. And there's a lot of additional information, details that I can get you around some of the stats and some of the, the resources and they're not requirements, but the word's escaping me. It's like the rap sheet of how much RAM, how much memory, the resources, right? So how much resources come on this appliance? We have all of that detail. If anybody needs to see that, you can post a question or something into the chat. I'd be happy to follow up with you afterward. So we've got the hardware appliance on the Network Prevent for Web side, and then we've got the Network Prevent for email, also web and API available in virtual appliances. So depending on what you're doing in your infrastructure and depending on how you want to serve this, now we have a lot more options and a lot more routes that we can take to supporting all this infrastructure. So here's a couple of really useful DLP links, DLP 15 links. There is a repository of the release notes and all the different documentation in the first link. And in the second link, this is all the information-centric tagging documentation. So it has its own set of documents, and there's quite a bit there to this stuff. So if the ICT functionality is something that you're interested in, definitely start taking a look at that documentation. If you have any questions, we've got a bunch of experts and a bunch of consultants and technical folks that are available to help you with that. They can help answer any of the questions you've got. If you have any questions off the top of your head, feel free to post them in the chat. And if we have time, we'll follow up with you or we will answer them at the end of the webinar here. If not, we will respond to you after the webinar and send them out to you in an email with a copy of the presentation. So how you can leverage us, I told you a little bit about us in the beginning. For existing DLP customers, we have something, it's pretty nifty, it's called a red flag assessment, and this is a non-fee, remote, in many cases, 2 to 4 hour session, go-to-meeting remote session, where we're kind of looking at your DLP environment and infrastructure from kind of like the perspective of a high-level human exam, right? We're looking for red flags, we're looking for real big problems, we're looking for things really sticking out, right? If you're a company who says, well, look, we bought DLP, we invested in this stuff, but our program is kind of stalled. Our requirements have changed. We started to migrate to the cloud, so we're wondering if we shouldn't just kind of do a restart on this whole thing. And we've also done some hires recently, so we've got new people that are going to be responsible for this. Often we would suggest or offer an insider threat program assessment, which is essentially going to go in and look at what you've done, but really look more forward and be more forward-looking in trying to help you architect a program that's going to meet your needs going forward in the future, that takes, maybe some of those latent problems or some of that latent pain that has come up between when you made this investment, when you originally embarked on this initiative and this journey, as opposed to where you are now or where you may be going. And of course, a lot of organizations that are looking to upgrade from either version 12 or even 14 up to 15, anytime we upgrade a security application or any application for that matter, we have an opportunity to re-architect, to redesign. So there's a number of different things that we can offer there in the way of projects to help you with this transition into DLP 15. And that's done through the advisory services here on the left. And then we also have a managed service that we offer around a lot of the Symantec technology, especially DLP, where we own the outcome. Going back to the risk reduction over time proposition, we can basically commit to an organization that, hey, we can get you here within this certain amount of time, and have more of an outcome-based approach to get you to notification, to get you to protection or prevention. And it's incumbent on us to do that, and that's how we're able to do that, is by controlling that outcome through a maturity plan and an operational managed service. Whereas when the advisory services side, it's more of you owning the outcome, and we help facilitate the project, bring a subject matter expert to help you with onboarding, with upgrading, with transformation, and then transfer knowledge to you and your teams to turn this over into your capable hands. So depending on your IT vision, depending on how you're structured and how you want to solve this, we have a couple of different approaches to give you the help that you need. So this is how you can contact us. If you do not follow us on some of the social feeds, I highly recommend that you do. If you want to take a look around on our website, we have a lot of great content, a lot of recordings of previous webinars, as well as a lot of the thought leadership and the materials that I've shown in the beginning of the webinar. I'm available out there on Twitter and LinkedIn. You can link up and meet up with me. And obviously, here's all of our contact information. If there are other questions or anything else that we can be of assistance with along the lines of the topic, feel free to reach out or reach out to me directly. Thank you so much. Have a great day.